I'm going to show you in this video a couple more problems from the SAT on circle equations that I thought might confuse you, and even if they don't, it's a good idea to learn how to get to the answers quickly, how to optimize, how to save time during the test, because you don't get points for writing. It's good to know the math. I think that's more important, but in the test it might be helpful to know how to get to the answers quickly. So I encourage you to pause the video as always and give it a go yourself. So let's just start reading it. Which of the following equations describes a circle with radius 10 that passes through the origin when graphed in the xy plane? So what might confuse you in reading this question is that you don't have a center, right? You just know the radius, that's a 10, and you know a point on the circle that is 0, 0, that's the origin, but you don't know the center, so you might be confused as to how to get to the equation. And it's a good idea always to first look at the answer choices and eliminate as many as possible. And if you were to do that, you would know that option A cannot be our answer. Why? Because on the right hand side there is a 10, and we know from our standard form of the equation of a circle, that which is x minus h whole squared plus y minus k whole squared equals to r squared, right? So there has to be the radius squared on the other side, and so there has to be 100 on this side, because a 10 square is 100, and so A is not an option. And now a nice idea would be to just plug in this point into each of these equations and see that for which of these does it hold true, right? That the left side is equal to the right hand side. This would mean that this point does lie on the equation. And you can do this in your head, because when you put a 0, 0 in each of these, all you have to do is just square these two numbers, all of these, and then add them. And it's pretty clear that this is also not an option, because a 5 squared is a 25, and a 25 plus a 25 is 50. It's not 100, and so this point, the 0, 0 point, does not lie on this circle. And the same goes for this one, because even a 10 squared is 100, and 100 plus 100 will be a 200, and so this is also not your option. And you don't even need to calculate the answer for this one. You don't even need to square these, because it might be difficult for you, it might be time consuming. So you can just move on to the next question, because this has to be the answer. Now on to the next one. Once again, give it a shot yourself. A circle in the xy plane has its center on the line x equals to 3. If the point 4, 5 lies on the circle and the radius is a square root 2, which of the following could be the center of the circle? So this isn't even a lot related to circle equations, but the concept is pretty much the same. So we know the x coordinate of the center because it lies on the line x equals to 3. And so let me call the center 3, y, where y is the y coordinate of the center of the circle, which we need to find, as you can see. And the other point is a 4, 5, which is on the circle. And so it's pretty obvious that the distance between these 2 points should be equal to the radius of the circle, which is a square root 2. And you might be tempted to form an equation using the distance formula, which the distance formula is simply, which also stems from the Pythagorean theorem, says that the distance between 2 points on a coordinate plane squared is equal to the difference between the x coordinates squared plus the difference between the y coordinates squared. And you can form an equation and get to the answer, but a faster way would be to just use each of these points and figure out the distance between this point and this point, and if that distance is equal to the square root 2, then it would mean that that's your answer. And so for the first one, what's the difference between the x coordinates? You can do this in your head. It's a 1. A 4 minus a 3 is a 1. And this is going to be the same for all of these, because in all of them the x coordinate is the same. So we know the difference between the x coordinates is 1, plus there has to be some difference between the y coordinates, and that has to be squared, and that will be equal to the square root of 2 squared, right? And so for the first point, for the y coordinates, it's going to be 5 minus a 3, which is a 2, and when you square it, you get a 4. And so this is a 5, and a 5 is not equal to the square root of 2 squared, which is a 2. And so this is not your option. For the second one, once again, we're going to do the same. The difference between the x coordinates is a 1, plus the difference between the y coordinates is also a 1, and I wrote a 1 here because 1 squared is also a 1, plus a 1 squared, and this is equal to the square root of 2 squared. Yes, it is equal to the square root of 2 squared. 1 plus a 1 is equal to a 2, which is equal to the square root of 2 squared, which is 2. I'm just using this equation right here, and I'm using these points. And as it turns out, that this is the correct option, because the distance between this point and this point is equal to the square root of 2. And now for the final question, which I think is the simplest. A circle in the xy plane contains the points -1, 1, 1, 1, and -1, -1. Which of the following is an equation of the circle? And now this one might seem a little tricky, because you might be tempted to sketch these points on a coordinate plane and try different things, but you will not get to the equation like that. You might try to form equations and try to substitute stuff, but the fastest way would be to simply plug in each of these points into these equations to see in which of them do all 3 points make the equation true. And you might say, Shayan, that's a lot of work, but it's actually not. You just have to make a simple observation that each of these numbers is a 1 or a -1. And when you square each of these numbers, you always get a 1. So for each of these points, whenever I put them into any of these, the x squared and the y squared will just make the negative into a positive. And so when I put these into them, the x squared will always be a 1 in each of these, because for each of these points, even if it's a -1, it's going to be a 1. And the y squared is also going to be a 1 when I plug in all of these points. And so when you add them together, the 1 plus 1 will be a 2, 1 plus 1 minus a 2. So in the first equation, I get it correct. 1 plus 1 is a 2, and 2 minus 2 is equal to a 0. And so this holds true for the first option. And so this is my answer. And even if the order was different, it wouldn't have mattered, because you could just have looked at it and you would have seen that this would be a 1 plus a 1 plus 2. That's not equal to a 0. This would be a 1 minus 2. That would not also have been equal to 0. And so that's how you need to think in terms of the answer choices that you have and try to eliminate as many as possible.